Hello and welcome to part 3 of our PowerCards 101 video series. This part is a little bit late because I tried to fancy up my video production system and didn't really have much luck with that, so I'm just going to do these straight out and I'll edit out any egregious mistakes, but you'll probably notice a few stumbles and typos along the way. Anyway, today we're going to talk about rolls, RollIDs, and conditionals. And let's jump right over into our game here. And I'm sure you all know by now that in Roll20, if you just type /roll in the chat box and give it a dice formula, you can roll dice. Nothing special there. What you might not be aware of is that you can also do what are called inline rolls. I'm going to attack and roll. Now to do this, you do 2 open square brackets, and then you put in your dice formula just like you would in the roll command, and close it with 2 more square brackets. And what this will do is it'll make that die roll, but it'll allow you to put other text in there as well. So it goes ahead and adds it right in line with the text that you entered in the chat window. So you notice when we hover over that 26, we see the die roll was an 18, and then we added the 5 and the 3. And one of the things you can do with this is we can go ahead in here and we can say anything we put in single square brackets inside an inline roll will pretty much just be ignored by the rolling system, but it will show up in the hover over text. So we can see now we get some idea that that 5 is from your strength bonus and the 3 is from your proficiency bonus, and that's why you're adding 8 points to your attack roll. So in power cards, we do pretty much the same thing. We bring up our macro here, and any content portion of a line in power cards can contain an inline roll. And we do that just the same as we do any inline roll in the chat window. Let's roll 1, 2 open square brackets, and test this macro. And we see exactly the same thing we see in the regular chat window when we use an inline roll. So that's the basics, and you can get as complicated as you want, but we can also, just like in the chat window, we can add things in square brackets that are ignored, and we can also add a few things that aren't ignored. So let's look at those options. So when I roll, let's up this, let's pretend I'm rolling with advantage, and that way we have more of a chance to get a 20 or a 1 on our dice. So I'm going to roll this a couple of times. Okay. So you see the normal roll highlighting is yellow if you don't roll a 1 and you don't roll a 20. And it's actually if you don't roll a 1 and you don't roll the maximum number on the die. So here we see that we rolled a 1 as one of our 2 options in our advantage roll. So the output is colored in red. There are 2 other color options. I don't know whether we'll get one here in the next couple of rolls. Alright, it's not cooperating. But if we were to roll a 20 as one of those 2 dice, we would get a green background on our roll. And if we were to roll both a 1 and a 20, and let's just kick this up to some kind of super mega advantage. So we can roll a lot of 1s. There we go. So one of our dice roll was a 20, and we didn't roll a 1, so we got a green colored background. If for some reason, and I'm just going to kick this to, let's roll 50 d20, we'll definitely get a 1 and a 20 then. If we roll both a 1 and a 20, so the maximum and the minimum on the die, we get a blue colored background. There are some situations there, though, where that is not what you'd want. Let's take a look at a dice roll from Shadowrun, and Let me pull, I have this in a clipboard window. I'm just going to pull this over. So instead of this attack roll, let's make an attack roll like this. So in Shadowrun, you roll a dice pool, and it's a number of d6, and you have to beat a certain target number to count each roll as a success. So if I roll that, I'm rolling 9d6, and I'm counting how many I rolled above a 5 or a 6 on the dice. So you're almost always going to have a blue number here, because with such, you're only rolling a d6, so you're almost always going to have a 1 and a 6. You can see well, that was a terrible roll. So you can see we're always going to have these color variations that we may not want. So if we do in front of our dice formula, in square brackets, NH for no highlighting, what this will do is make the same roll, but it'll ignore this green, red, and blue highlighting, and it'll just leave the default yellow background for our rolls. So that way, you're not constantly varying colors, because just the way the dice formula works out, you're almost never going to have the standard yellow background. And they don't really mean anything in a Shadowrun's roll. So what if you rolled a single 1 or a single 6? It doesn't make sense to change the color of the dice because of that. There's a couple other of these that we can use here. If we don't want to see the formatting at all, we can use TXT, and that will just output the number of the final result. We can't hover over it. We can't see anything else about it. And conversely, to go in the other direction, XPND, which stands for expand, will make the same roll, but it'll put the entire block of what the dice results were out to the chat window as well. So those are just a couple of options we can use to modify how our rolls look. There's another one that we can use, and I'm going to get rid of this Shadowrun roll for a moment, and I'm going to pop over and bring back our 5e, or I'm going to bring in a 5e attack roll. So as we saw in the chat window, this is nothing out of the ordinary. It's just going to make a regular D&D 5e attack roll, adding 5 for strength and 3 proficiency. But the last kind of thing we can put before our dice formula in square brackets, start with a $sign and give this a name. We'll call it ATK. So what we're doing here is creating a roll ID that we can reference later in our card for conditional statements and for output. So what this means is we're going to take all this, calculate what it is, and then put the value into $ATK. So again, if we run this, we don't see anything different from the normal result. We see in our hover over window that the first thing in the list is $ATK, but because it's in square brackets, the rolling system ignores that anyway. But what we can do is use that rolled, and then to reference a roll ID, we put it in square brackets and we start it with a caret symbol, and then we give it its name on your attack roll. Alright, so what we'll see now is the roll itself, and then immediately after that, just a plain text, you rolled a 25 on your attack roll. So that's the one of the two ways we can use roll IDs. And I want to take a short detour here and say that if you're familiar with programming, you might be tempted to think that a roll ID is a variable. It is definitely not. While we can use it for some of the things you can use a variable for, what you can't do is use it in other roles. So I can't say, one thing I see on the forums all the time is somebody wants to say, my weapon does this much bludgeoning damage and this much fire damage, and I want to make 2 roll IDs and then add the 2 of them together to get my final amount of damage. That doesn't work in PowerCards. All the rolls happen at the same time when the PowerCard starts processing. So by the time the second roll on a card gets to be executed, it doesn't know about any other roll IDs in the card. It will just go ahead and leave those as zeros. It'll pretend they don't exist. So that's not possible with the roll ID system. You can use it to display the output like this. And there's one more use for conditional statements that we're going to talk about. But before we get there, I want to show you some of the parts of a roll ID that you can use to get more information about the ID. So we're going to bring back that shadow run roll real quick. And I'm going to bring another roll in as well. And these are just for demonstration purposes, because some of the things we're going to look at don't make a whole lot of sense in Dungeons and Dragons. So in our shadow run roll, let's give that a roll ID of S run, and then we have another roll here that we're just going to roll 10d10, and we're going to assign it to the 10's roll ID. So our 5e attack is going to be assigned to the attack ID. The shadow run attack is going to be assigned to the S run attack ID. And then finally, we're just going to roll a bunch of d10s and assign the result to the 10's roll ID. So what we're going to look at is the modifier tags you can use based on roll IDs to get some more detailed information about them. And there are a bunch of these, so let's start with the most straightforward, base and total. So the way we reference these is we use the name of the roll ID, and then a dot, and then the modifier we want. So base is going to be the result of the die without the modifiers. So in the case of our 5e attack, we roll 1d20, and say we roll a 15. And then we add 5 for strength and 3 for proficiency. So the 15 is what's going to show up as base. And the fact that I have base in square brackets here doesn't matter for this. I can pull that out. We're not referencing names of things up here or anything. This is just the base roll. So what you rolled on the dice is attack.base. The total is everything added together. So the base plus 5 plus 3. And using atk.total is exactly the same as using just atk. So let's run that, and we'll see that we rolled a 1 on our die, and then we added 9 to it. So our base is 1, and our total is 9. And we see 9 or 9 because we're saying attack total or just attack. We also have, and I can't remember exactly why these were requested, but this was a request from someone on the forums. So I added these two, half base and half total. And as you might expect, half base is half of the attack base value, and half total is half of the attack total value. Nothing very complicated there. The base was 5. Half base is 2. It rounds down, which is like the standard rule in 5e D&D. I'm not sure whether that's the standard in other systems. And again, the total was 13, and half the total is 6 because it rounds down. And we can take this or ATK off there because that's no longer valid. So the next one we want to talk about is successes. So in Shadowrun, which is why I have a Shadowrun attack up here, as I said, you roll a number of dice and you count the ones that beat a certain number as successes or hits. So the .ss, and I have a typo here, .ss will output the number of dice in this 96 roll that were greater than 5. So let's run that, and I'm going to make this window a little larger. So we produce 3 hits, and I must have an extra. I do have an extra bracket there. So if we look at our Shadowrun roll, we have 4, 5, 4, 2, 2, 1, 5, 5, 5, 2, 1. So the 3 5s were our hits, and that's what's being counted there. Next one we want to look at is we'll use the tens roll we made, the 10d10 roll, and we're going to say tens.ones and tens.tens. So all this is doing is counting the number of dice that rolled 1 and the number of dice that rolled 10. And this tens is kind of a holdover from the original setup of PowerCards. It is useful for D10s, but really not a whole lot else. So if we look at our D10s roll, we see that we rolled 1 10 and we rolled 3 1s, which when we hover over the dice, we see that that's exactly what we do have. In the development version of PowerCards, now this is not quite available on one-click yet, but you can install it from the development source if you wish, and you can find the link for that in the PowerCards thread on Roll20 forums. We have 3 more modifiers we can use. We have odds and evens, in which, as the name implies, we'll count the number of odds and the number of evens that come up on the dice. And then we have one more that I'm just going to go ahead and paste in here before we run this, called aces. And this is terminology I kind of borrowed from Deadlands. In Deadlands, when you roll a die, if you get the highest number on that dice, it's called an ace. So similar to the tens, except that this will work for any dice we roll. If we rolled d12s, it would count how many 12s we rolled. If we rolled d20s, it would count the number of 20s we rolled. So let's run this. And we see our d10 roll. We rolled 0 aces. We didn't roll any 10s. And we see that in our list down here. We rolled 3 odd numbers and 7 even numbers. And if we were to count those out, we'd see that those come out right. So these are great. You would probably not display them like this. There might be a reason where you would want to show some of that information. But what these will really be useful for is conditional tags. So let's get rid of some of this stuff and just delete all that out of this card. And we'll leave the 5e attack and the Shadowrun attack for now. Actually, let's even pull the Shadowrun attack. No offense to Shadowrun players, but we're going to stick with something that is simple to understand as we go through conditionals. So a conditional statement starts with, and I'm sorry, I keep using the word statement, but they're just conditional tags. If you remember from the first video, if we were to do something like that, and we were to put a $ in front of this. So let's run this just normal, and I'll make this a roll too. 1d8 plus 5 points. So if we run this, it really doesn't matter. Oh, I forgot a bracket. It really doesn't matter what the attack roll was. You're always going to see the damage output. So if you remember from the very first video, if I were to put a $ in front of this, it's going to hide the whole line. So now no matter what the roll is, I'm not going to see the damage roll. And that's really what a conditional statement is doing. A conditional, and I'll put that down there for a minute. A conditional starts with 2 question marks, ends with 2 question marks, and then has some kind of condition between those 2 question marks. And in this case, let's make it a simple ATK dot total, and remember that's the same as just ATK, is greater than 15. Now, it's important that there is a space between every component of a conditional. So after the 2 question marks, we have a space. After what we're checking against, we have a space. We have our operator and a space. We have our value we're checking and a space. And then the last 2 question marks. So let's pull this back here, because after the final 2 question marks, we just go ahead with the rest of our statement. So now when I run this, it will only display the damage if the attack total, which is going to be 1d20 plus 8, is greater than 15. And actually, if it's a test against armor class, it would probably be greater than or equal to 15. So let's go ahead and run that. So we rolled a 17 total, which means we did damage, so we display the damage result. Run it again a couple times until we miss. Alright, so this time our attack roll was a 12. So we do not display the damage line because attack total is not greater than equal to 15. And conditionals, you can have as many of them as you want. You can repeat the same conditional. So let's say this weapon had some kind of special effect. Target must save versus DC 15 or be knocked prone. So again, this would happen, and actually we can't say hit because all these have to be unique. So now if we do hit, we'll get both of those lines, and if we miss, which might take me a couple of clicks to get, there we go, we don't see either one of them. And that's a very basic conditional, but we can get more complicated than that. Let's pull these out, and I'm going to paste in one from my notepad. And in this case, we're going to say if attack.base, which remember is the number that we rolled on the dice, is not 20. So we didn't roll a 20 on the d20. And the attack total is greater than or equal to 15. So if we didn't roll a 20, but we would hit the armor class, we're going to go ahead and display the damage. And what's important to note here is that you can have multiple conditions in a conditional statement, and you can separate them by and or. And unlike in some programming languages where there would be precedence of operations or anything like that, as soon as you hit one statement or one condition in a statement linked with ands that is not true, the whole thing will not be true. And if you join things with ors, as soon as you hit one that is true, the whole thing's going to be true. It goes from left to right. It doesn't worry about grouping operations. You can't enclose things in parentheses or anything like that. It's just a simple set of statements that are evaluated left to right across the board. And as soon as it finds one that it knows is going to make the whole thing either true or false, it sets the whole thing true or false. And as you might imagine, behind the scenes, what's happening here, and I'll copy this, but I won't run it, is that if this comes out to be true, we essentially, in the background, PowerCards does this. If it comes out to be false, PowerCards does this. So what's in the card is still happening, potentially. The dice rolls are happening, at least. But we're just not showing the line. So that's internally kind of what's going on with a conditional. But in this case, like I said, if we did not score a critical hit, we're just going to roll the regular dice for damage. What happens if we did score a critical hit? Well, we can do that by saying if the attack base is 20, equals 20, that was a critical hit. Because in D&D 5th edition, if you roll 20, it's an automatic hit and it's a critical. That is different for some versions of D&D. But what we do in that case is we add an extra, or we double the number of dice that we roll for damage, but not the modifiers. So we do that there. And then finally, our last potential case is that we missed. So let's copy over another conditional. If the base is a 1, because in 5th edition D&D, a 1 is always a miss, whether your bonuses would let you hit or not. Or our attack total is less than 15, so we don't meet the armor class, then we display the miss line. So this is more or less a complete breakdown of what can happen based on this 5e attack roll. So let's run this a couple of times. Here we go. We rolled a 20, or we rolled a 14 plus our modifiers, so we hit for 13 damage. See if we can get, there we go. We got a miss, and let's see if we can get a critical hit. That might take a few clicks. In fact, let's change this to give ourselves super advantage again and roll 60-20, keep highest 1, and it should take us a lot fewer clicks to get a critical hit. There we go. So now we see that our dice roll, we had a 20 in there, and that's the one we kept as our roll. and we critically hit 2d8 plus 5 damage. So drop this back to regular old attacking, and let's take a look at the operators we can use in a conditional. So we've seen not equals, we've seen greater than equals. No surprise that there is also less than or equal to that we could use. We've seen equal to, which is the two equal signs, and that's a JavaScript convention there. We've seen less than. There's also, of course, greater than, and less than. There are a few that are two more that you might not immediately recognize is percent and tilde %. And to see what these do, let's hop over to the PowerCards wiki and search for tilde %. Oop. All right, here we go. So these are evenly divisible and not evenly divisible. And I don't actually know that I have ever used these in a card, but they are available. And this could be a disaster, but let's try one of them out here. If it's evenly divisible by 5. Oop. And so we know we'll get a result. We'll do not divisible by 5. All right, so if we were to run that, we rolled a 3 on the dice, which is not divisible by 5, so we get the no line. I'll run it a couple of times and see if we get one that is. Okay, so here we rolled a 15 on the dice. That's divisible by 5, so we get the divisible by 5 as yes. Again, like I said, I haven't had a reason to use those operands in a card, but they are available if you have a use for them. Let's see where we're at here. So we talked about the operators, we talked about multiple conditionals, and we talked about the order of operations. That is really the basics of using conditionals and RollIDs within PowerCards on Roll20. I'm going to wrap this one up here, and I will see you in part 4. Thank you very much for watching.